And Elizabeth, can you introduce yourself?
Yes, I will. My name's Elizabeth Grieser, and I'm the operations manager for the League of Women Voters here in Columbus. I'm the only staff person, and I work part-time for the League. So the rest, almost all of our programs and projects are managed by our 350 members, and they're all volunteers. Our board is volunteer. Everyone's joins the League because they're interested in civic education and engagement. So I know you are all volunteers, so we're very kind of similarly structured organization. I always like to lead with the volunteer part because I think a lot of people think that we just have employees, you know, working in a big office generating like other kinds of nonprofits like United Way or the YWCA, but we're not structured like that. So Joan contacted me a few weeks ago about doing a voter registration training for you all. And we've been doing registration trainings for a number of local organizations this year. We've been trying to do a lot of what I call indirect voter outreach, which means doing trainings for different groups, finding ways that we can be active when we can't be on the ground, talking to people like we usually do at farmers markets and community neighborhood festivals and things like that. So I'm going to go through like some of the ways that we've done socially distanced outreach, some of the ways that you can still do in-person voter outreach. It's kind of a grab bag of options, and then you can choose what works for you all, and I'd be happy to work with you after this training if you have specific things that you like to set up, or if you need materials. I mean, we're here to support groups like yours who are doing outreach in your community. So I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. And if you have comments or questions during the presentation, you can feel free to just shout them out or use the chat box. I'll try and keep tabs on that. Let me share my screen. Okay. Everyone see this?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So a little bit of background on the League of Women Voters, besides what I already told you. We were founded 100 years ago, the same time women won the right to vote. And the aim of the organization was educating women on voting. And now we focus on nonpartisan civic engagement. We want everyone to have access to the polls. We want all voters to have information on what's on the ballot, candidates and issues. We never endorse a candidate or a political party. Sometimes we have stances on issues, but our voter registration efforts are completely nonpartisan. So we also have a state level office of the League of Women Voters of Ohio, and they focus on things like advocating for voter rights reforms at the State House. So right now we're working on automatic voter registration, additional early voting options, prepaid postage for ballots and absentee ballot request forms, funding for the Boards of Elections to handle the onslaught of mail-in ballots that will be happening this fall, and then things like being able to request an absentee ballot form online. So they handle more of the voter rights issues at the state level. So we're going to start with some like nuts and bolts about voter registration and how voting works in Ohio, and then we'll move on to information about civic engagement and taking into account social distancing, and also the importance of reaching out to underserved populations, which I know that your group had a specific interest in. So let's get started. The first part's fairly dry, so if you have questions, feel free to let me know. But it can get pretty complicated. So who can vote in Ohio? You have to be a U.S. citizen. You must be an Ohio resident for at least 30 days, so 30 days by election day. The reason why you don't usually have to ask people how long they've been a resident of Ohio is that the voter registration deadline is 30 days before election day. So if you're registering someone before the deadline, they're going to be an Ohio resident if they show up to vote on election day. You have to be 18 by election day. So if you know any 17-year-olds that are going to be turning 18 this summer or fall, they can register to vote now. We have a pretty big program in the high schools where we talk to juniors and seniors about why they should vote, why they think, voting matters. And we try and register all 17-year-olds and the 8-year-olds to vote. And the last one I like to specifically point out, because different states have really different rules on this issue. In Ohio, if you're not currently serving time for a felony conviction, you can vote. If you do have a felony conviction on your record, you need to re-register to vote after you get out of prison. So a lot of times, people have the assumption that if they've been in jail, they have a felony conviction, they can't vote, because in some states that's true. But in Ohio, you can vote. Another specific type of voter that has a few more complications are college students. And that's because they can choose where they want to register to vote. They can use their campus address, or they can use their parents' address, or wherever they consider their permanent home. So if someone's going to school at Ohio State, their parents live in Cleveland, they can register to vote in Cuyahoga County or Franklin County. This decision doesn't affect their federal financial aid or their license or anything like that. And students can choose every year where they want to vote. So they can decide one year they're going to vote in Cuyahoga County, and the next year they can re-register in Franklin County as a voter. So that's something to talk to college students about. And it's also really important, we found, to talk to them about if they have a plan for voting. So if they want to vote in Cuyahoga County, have they thought about how they're going to cast their ballot? Are they going to go up there on election day and vote? Are they going to request an absentee ballot? If they're going to do that, do they know where to get stamps? Do they know, how to go about requesting one of those? So it can get a little complicated. But if you are registering college students, a lot of times the university will have pretty clear guidelines that you can get from their administrative offices on how, what addresses to use and best practices for their particular university. Okay, so usually at this point in the training, I give everyone a voter registration form so you can see it, but since we are virtual here, I just have blown up a portion of the registration form. Ohio has one voter registration form that can be used for all 88 counties. This is the first few questions on the registration form. It's pretty straightforward, but I mean, you'd be surprised how many times that there are mistakes on the form. So one place where there's a lot of mistakes is that people don't check, are you a U.S. citizen, or will you be at least 18 years of age for the next general election? And the Board of Elections, they are allowed to just throw out the form if you don't check these boxes. They don't have to contact you and tell you that they didn't take the form or anything like that. So we always recommend, if you're a volunteer helping someone fill out the form, that you kind of either look over their shoulder while they're doing it, or just ask them to wait for a minute while you review it and see if they've missed any of the boxes. So here we just have the name, address, county where you live, not country. A lot of times people put United States. You have to put your birth date, and you have to either put your Ohio driver's license number or the last 4 digits of your social security number. This is the more bottom part of the form, and that's where you're updating your address or you're changing your name. So if you know anyone who's gotten married or divorced, or they moved recently, it's still the same form you fill out, whether you're registered for the first time or you're updating your registration. So if any of this applies to the voter, they just fill out this part. And then the signature has to fit within this little box here, because they scan that, and then that's what the poll worker uses to verify that your signature matches.
Elizabeth.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm not sure if it's just me, but your voice is going kind of in and out.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It could just be on my laptop, but
Is that better?
yes.
Okay. Yes, if you can't hear me, let me know. Okay, so this is the signature part. You have to make sure your signature fits within the lines, or the Board of Elections can throw it out if it doesn't fit within the line. So there's a lot of rules on this form. Okay, so common errors, we mostly, talked about it already. One thing to mention is that you can't put a PO box for your address. It has to be an actual address. But you can put things like the park bench at the corner of High Street and Town Street. It doesn't have to be a actual building. And another thing to really take into consideration is that the Board of Elections gets a lot of these forms, and they're filled out by hand, so they are trying to decipher everyone's handwriting. If they can't read it, then they're not gonna accept the form. They're not gonna be able to put you in the system. So just trying to remind people to slow down and write as clearly as they can. So if you are doing a paper registration form and you're helping other people fill out the form, you need to return someone else's form within 10 days after they've completed the form, or by the voter registration deadline. So you can return it to the Board of Elections office, that's on Morse Road, or you can turn them in to the Secretary of State's office, which is downtown. There are a few other options. These are the official rules, but when I've had groups that have worked with the league and they have a voter registration drive, and then they have, like 25 or 30 forms, and they'll drop them off at my house. I have a bin in my front porch. It looks like there's, I have a bin on my front porch where people can leave forms, and then I go through them and make sure there's no errors, and I, turn them in for you. So if you're working and you can't get to the Board of Elections during business hours, that's something that I like to offer to people, and we can kind of work out the details later. There's someone that's just coming into the meeting too.
Hello.
Hello?
Hello. Is this the training?
Yes. Is this Carla?
It is.
Okay,
Jackie?
yes, we've started. Thanks for joining.
Okay.
Hi, Carla. I am recording the training, so if you want to go back later and listen to the first part, Joan said she was going to send it out to everyone.
Thank you.
And we just covered paper registration. So what happens next after you turn the forms in is within 20 business days, the County Board of Elections must register you to vote and send you a mailed notification that you're registered, where your polling place is, and other details. So just take into consideration this is 20 business days, so it can be like a month after you registered to vote that you get confirmation that you are in the system. Okay, so most years our bread and butter work here at the League are these paper registration forms that we take to various organizations and events throughout the community. We've switched a little bit more to online voter registration this year, and online voter registration has been approved in Ohio for the past 3 years. And you can go to the Secretary of State's website. There's the direct link here, the first bullet point, or if you just go to voteohio.gov, that has a lot of different links, then it'll take you there as well. It's a little easier to remember. So the online voter registration works pretty much the same way as the paper form. The one thing to take into consideration is that you may only use the online voter registration form if you already have an Ohio State ID. So if you've just moved here from Michigan, you're going to need to fill out a paper form because the Ohio doesn't have any record of you in its state system. Okay, so this particular slide is of more use when we're doing more in-person voter registration, but this talks about why we usually use paper registration in the field, just because a lot of times you would have to either hand someone your cell phone so that they can register themselves online, or you'd have to direct them using their cell phone. Also, you have to have Wi-Fi connectivity. It just gets a lot more challenging when you're doing that in person. Okay, so I'm not sure how familiar you all are with the voter purges that happened last year. But in September 2019, there were 182,000 Ohioans that were purged from their voter polls. Ohio has a rule that was upheld by the Supreme Court that says that if you have not voted in 2 years, the Secretary of State or your local Board of Elections will send you a postcard. If you don't respond or vote in the next 4 years, then you can be taken off the voter rolls. You know, some of this is done so that you can have what they would consider a clean voter roll for Ohio. You take off people that have passed away or moved out of state. But there were quite a few people that were removed from the voter rolls that should not have been. One example was actually the executive director of the Ohio League of Women Voters. She was on the list to be purged, and she votes in every.
Wow.
Yeah, they had the New York Times come in and cover that. So, you know, there's a lot of, since voting is done on a county to county-wide basis, it makes the statewide voter roll pretty messy because the state is relying on each county to send in its information, and it can come in different formats. And each county may have a different way of keeping track of who's voting and who's not. So it was a bit of a mess. We're not expecting a voter purge this coming year in 2020, but because of the voter purge last year, we are asking everyone to verify or check your voter registration status. And that's actually a great way to get people's interest when you're doing a voter registration drive. Instead of saying, hey, are you registered to vote? You start off the conversation by saying, have you checked your voter registration lately? And most people haven't. And that may get them thinking like, oh, hey, I moved recently and I'm not sure if I updated my address. Or, you know, I mean, they might say, oh, I haven't voted in like 3 or 4 years. You know, you should definitely then check and see if they're registered to vote. So the way you can do that is online at the Ohio Secretary of State's website. I did a screenshot here. This is the direct link here, but you can also use myohiovote.com, and that'll get you to like the main homepage where you can click to check someone's voter registration status. And all you need is first, last name, and county, and it will come up. Now, if you have a really common name like James Smith, You know, there may be a number of those in Franklin County, but when I looked up myself, there's only one Elizabeth Grieser living in Franklin County. I could see right away that I was registered at my correct address. It told me my polling location. So there's a lot of good information here. Okay, now we're going to switch to absentee ballot applications. So if you registered someone to vote or you checked their voter registration status, the next thing that we are asking people to focus on this year is absentee ballot applications. Because we're not sure exactly what the election will look like in November, we are urging everyone to request absentee ballot applications now. Now, the Secretary of State has said that he is going to mail all registered voters an absentee ballot application after Labor Day. So everyone who's registered should be receiving something in the mail. However, a lot of times, you know, people don't open their mail. They may, you know, throw it away not knowing what it is. We're expecting that there will be a glut of absentee ballot applications being sent to the Board of Elections in mid to late September. So if you want to skip that crowded period and make sure that your absentee ballot application gets processed now, you can request it now. And we've been trying to do it in conjunction with voter registration. So if you register someone to vote, you can also do an absentee ballot application right away. Now they're not going to get their ballot until everyone else does in October, but they'll be the first ones that are getting mailed out their ballots. Let's see. One piece of legislation that we are really pushing for is Senate Bill 191 that will allow for online ballot requests. It's been stuck in committee for a while. The state legislature is on summer recess, so we don't know when or if that will pass. We're really hoping it will, because right now it's a little bit of a complicated procedure to get your absentee ballot. You have to print out an absentee ballot application from your local Board of Elections website, fill it out, sign it, then mail it in to your Board of Elections, or you could drop it off in person. You know, they get it, they process it, and then they mail you an absentee ballot. You get the absentee ballot, and you fill it out, sign it, and then you mail it back to the Board of Elections. So for a lot of people, this is just like too much hassle. You know, it gets complicated. Maybe you don't have stamps. You don't know where to mail it into. So we're kind of hoping that there may be a more streamlined process in the future that we can use. Does anyone have any questions about absentee ballot applications or how that would work for the election in November?
So are they counted as they come in, or are they counted after the voting day, after the 3rd of November?
So in Franklin County, the absentee ballot request forms are processed as they come in. And then you're just kind of in a waiting line until they have the ballots ready, and then they'll mail them out based on where first person to send in the request gets the first ballot, and so on. When you send in your absentee ballot, they keep them all, they count them all before the election, they count them as they come in, but then they don't release the data or the results until election day. So if you're ever watching the local news and it's like 6:30 and it'll say like, no, I'm sorry, it'll be 7:30, which is when the polls close, and it'll say 1% of precincts, and you're like, how could they even know already? Those are the absentee ballot results. So those get released first right after the polls close.
So I have a question. So did I understand you correctly to say that this year for the November election, the process is that everyone should, given the uncertainty of how the election will be ultimately managed, everyone should submit an absentee ballot and vote absentee ballot?
So we are not sure exactly what the election in November will look like. We are recommending that people request an absentee ballot. That way you can vote early. You don't have to worry about, like, maybe on election day there won't be any in-person voting like there was for the primary. The plan is that if there are no flare-ups of the coronavirus or other incidences, that there will be early in-person voting. We don't know exactly what those dates and times look like, and that there will be polling places open on election day to vote. But we can't guarantee that, and like we saw with the primary, we are expecting to have in-person voting until like 12 hours before the polls were going to open. So if we have people that really, really like voting in person. So if that's your plan and you want to do that, then, that's great. That's fine. But for people that, want to have a plan and kind of take care of it early, we're suggesting absentee ballot applications just because of the uncertainty.
Hi, I have a question. Will they have early voting on Morse Road?
The plan is that there will be early voting on Morse Road, yes.
Okay.
Right now, that's going to be the only early voting center. We've been trying to push for additional early voting centers in other areas of the county, but right now it's only going to be at Morse Road. And I expect the hours to be business hours, Monday through Friday, 8 to 5 for the 4 weeks leading up to the election, with weekend hours the weekend before the election day. But there's a couple, the reason I keep saying I'm not sure is because there are some bills in the Ohio State House that are still pending, which would change early voting hours, would change some dates of when voters can vote. So until those are officially approved or, rejected, we're kind of in limbo.
So are you also then saying that in the process of getting people to look into whether or not, to look into their voter status, their registration status, if they're not registered, to try to help facilitate that, in addition to that, share information about the importance of, once you're registered, get information about an absentee ballot or get that absentee ballot?
It really depends on the situation. So if you are doing a voter registration drive in which you have a table and you have time to talk to people, then yes, that like multi-step conversation is really useful. Or at least after you've checked their voter registration, say, hey, have you thought about voting absentee this year? And then kind of go into the whole reasons why we're encouraging people to do that. And then you can either hand them a blank absentee ballot application, you can let them know, that they can go print it out on the Board of Elections website. So you don't necessarily have to go through the whole process. And sometimes we're in a situation, we've had a number of volunteers downtown at the protests the last couple weeks, and they're just going around with a clipboard and a mask, and it's not really the situation that we would make people fill out multiple forms and have a really prolonged conversation. So in that situation, we're just focusing on voter registration and checking people's registration. And then we give them a card, which I will show you later on. I have a copy here that gives them information on, where they can go check their polling location, how they can request an absentee ballot, what early voting is, things like that, so that you don't necessarily have to have the whole prolonged conversation.
Elizabeth, I have a question. In terms of the online absentee ballot, once you request it online, are you only able to request one ballot at a time? Can you request multiple ballots and have those applications available? For, if we're doing a registration table, for example, we have the absentee ballot application that will also be available where they can complete, and making sure that they mail them back.
Yeah, so you can do it a number of different ways. Each person has to fill out a separate absentee ballot application. You know, since right now we don't have online absentee ballot requests, I'm not exactly sure how that would look. I think you would, you know, have to do it individually for each voter. But if you're doing a voter registration drive, you can choose to either have the voter turn it in themselves, or you can turn it in for them or facilitate that for them.
Okay.
Does that
So
answer your question?
Yes, but we can download multiple number of applications.
Oh, yes, yes, yes.
That was really my question.
Yeah, yeah. So there's a PDF, and I'll send a follow-up email that Joan can send out, and I'll just have links to all of these. I'm sorry, hold on one second. Sorry, my kids are home and my husband's at work, so it always happens. But there's just a PDF of the absentee ballot application and the voter registration form. You can print off as many copies as you want, or you can go to the Board of Elections and they'll give you copies. So there's no restriction on that. But this is what an absentee ballot application looks like. It's pretty straightforward. You just want to make sure that the person has actually signed it. We've had situations where people have filled it out and then not signed it, and then, you know, it's not valid. So you also want to make sure that they check general election in section 6. I've talked to the Franklin County Board of Elections, and they say that you don't necessarily have to put the exact date of the election as long as you check general election. Okay. So there are a number of people who are not maybe comfortable voting absentee, and one of the reasons is that they feel like their ballot could get lost in the system. So Franklin County has a program called Ballot Tracks, and as long as the voter is comfortable using online programs, it's an easy way that you can track where your ballot is. So I used it this past election, and it'll send you a text every time something is changed in your application status. So the first text you get is when the Board of Elections has received your absentee ballot request, and then you'll get a text or an email when they've mailed out your absentee ballot, and then you'll get a final text when they have received and processed your ballot. So that's a good way of, you know, feeling like you know where you are in the system, and if there's a problem, you can know more or less like where the problem came up. So this is the address for that that program, and there's also just a link on the Franklin County Board of Elections website. Okay. So that was a lot of, you know, just nuts and bolts of what forms and things you would use in a voter registration drives. You know, the League of Women Voters has been spending the last 3 or 4 months figuring out best practices for voter registration during social distancing. And I never know when I'm talking to an organization how eager you are to get out in person and register voters, and how interested you are in more social distance options. Sorry. So one easy way to do voter outreach with social distancing is social media posts with voting links. You know, if you have a way of pushing that message out to your contacts or through different organizations that may have larger groups of contacts in underserved organizations, that's a great way to get information out. I also suggest to reach out to your organizational contacts, religious organizations, community groups, any place that's doing direct work with people. A few examples that we've been working on, one would be food banks. We're putting absentee ballot request forms with voter registration info and voter status info in food bags that people are picking up at food pantries. So we're trying to be creative about ways that we can reach people where normally we would be there in person, registering them while they're waiting in line to pick up their food bag. So there's a lot of other ways that you can like get involved and still be socially distant. We are doing training and working on doing get out the vote phone banks and texting. Our ideas are that we would help people check their voter registration status and then also help them with filling out and completing absentee ballot request forms. You can do postcard parties. Since voter addresses are public information, you can pretty easily get a large list of voters who maybe haven't voted in the last 3 or 4 years or are from a specific zip code. And you can have postcards which just tell them a variety of information about voting. You can have voting materials available in your neighborhood. In my neighborhood, I have a neighbor who has a big box on her porch, and it around election time, it just has a lot of absentee ballot request forms in there with envelopes, so people can come and take that if they need to. We have an election day phone bank, and that is from 6:30 a.m. to 6:30 p.m. We have volunteers that answer questions from voters that are calling in about their polling location or information on a specific issue, things like that. So we do that in conjunction with the local CBS affiliate, Channel 10, and that's always really fun. And we take volunteers from around the community to work the phone bank. I put in a poll worker because that's not socially distant, but the Board of Elections are really pretty desperate for poll workers. A lot of their poll workers are senior citizens and aren't able, to be poll workers right now because of the health risk. So they're really working hard to recruit individuals to be poll workers on election day, because if there aren't enough poll workers, then the election will not run smoothly and cause all kinds of problems. So if you're interested, or if you know of anyone who is interested, you can let me know or let the Board of Elections know. I believe you can be 17 and be a poll worker. So they are also recruiting kids that are in high school to be poll workers. Okay. Does anyone have questions about like civic engagement or?
Yes, this is Lynn. Do you have any templates of social engagement, social media flyers or anything like that that have been successful throughout the years that we could look at?
Yes, I do. My advice on social media is to stick to one topic at a time. So we'll have a post and it just says, check your voter registration, click here. Like, so not to get too involved and then kind of send out multiple social media posts, but I have a variety of things that I can send and share with you, and you're more than welcome to use what we've come up with.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. We'll be having more information as the election season progresses as well. We put out a voter guide called the Voter Information Bulletin, and we have an online guide as well that's a nonpartisan guide to candidates and issues. So that's information that we try and share as widely as we can with the community, and the more people that are sharing that information, the better. Okay, so get out the vote resources. Like I said, I will send out a follow-up email with some links to different things, but Vote 411 is our online voter guide, and that will be active hopefully by late September. I'll have all the information up there. We have voter information sheets that we've come up with. These can be used either as hard copy materials, as social media posts, or just as online PDFs that you're sharing. So there's a variety of topics here: voting while you're homeless, voting if you have a felony record, voting for new Americans, provisional ballots, why, conversation starters on why should I vote, because voter apathy is a definite real obstacle that we are always trying to overcome. Then we have,
I'm
Lynn?
sorry. I'm sorry. I see the Vote 411. I saw a cute mask that someone had with that message on it. Do you, and they say it came from League of Women Voters. Do you have any of those masks you could provide us?
So those masks, and I know exactly what you're talking about, they are being sold by the League of Women Voters in Virginia. And I think they just have like an Etsy store and people have been ordering from them. So I can send you a link. I don't have any of those personally, but we do have some just like plain cloth masks that we can give to people that are doing voter registration in person. And we're also in the works of trying to come up with some more like swag that we can use when we're doing in-person voter registration. And then finally, our voting 123 cards, and that's what is like an all-purpose just information card. And it looks really cluttered on the screen, but I tried to do the front of it and the back of it. So the back of it on the right-hand side of the screen is ID requirements for voting, and kind of walking you through the whole process of deciding how to cast your ballot. And then these dates are subject to change slightly, but these are important: Ohio general election dates, early voting hours, and then different voter resources. So this, I thought I had it. So I don't know if people can see me, but it's like a postcard size piece of material that's what we use to hand out at all of our voter registration drives.
How do we get swag?
Well, I can definitely give you these voter information cards.
That would be good.
We're working with a couple other voter rights groups in Ohio to come up with masks, like you mentioned, and hand sanitizer, just some like stickers, buttons, things like that. I am not in charge of the swag, but I will check and see where it is. And if you guys, get a specific event schedule, that can make sure that you have.
Yeah, so one of the things we have kind of talked about, my sorority did a car canvassing for Census 2020.
Mm-hmm.
So we're kind of thinking about combining voter registration and Census 2020 together and do go through and I think we talked about primarily focusing on underserved communities. So, we would just basically do like a car parade maybe and pass out information as people come out of their homes. We blow the horn, whatever, and then have someone would put a bag with the information on the step or the lawn or that type of thing. So we wanted to do both, focus on Census 2020 and voter registration.
I think that's a great idea. And we have a couple local churches who are doing drive-in voter registration.
Mm-hmm.
So they're using like their large parking lot to have people come in, drive up, and then a volunteer will come with a form that they can use to then fill out or check their registration. That's a little more complicated because you need to have a venue that's willing to host you,
Mm-hmm.
and then do the advertising for that as well. But that's another option that is more socially distant.
So I know a lot of organizations used to do the registration at grocery stores. Is that something that you're not recommending, or I mean, it would be a challenge kind of to socially distance if you have
Yeah.
table and pens and
So our experience is that bigger grocery stores such as Kroger or Walmart will not let you be there. No, I mean, any year, it doesn't matter about coronavirus. Smaller grocery stores and more like boutique grocery stores, they are usually happy to have you there as long as you've gone through their management. We haven't tried to do that yet this year, but in the past, you know, we brought our own table, our own forms, we just put them outside, and it's a great place to catch people. If you do that, I would definitely recommend masks, having lots of hand sanitizer there for people to use. But you know, people are at grocery stores. I mean, I think that some people are completely comfortable coming up and filling out forms, and other people aren't. And you know, the people that aren't probably won't stop, or maybe they would just take some information with them. But it's definitely something looking into. But I will let you know that the big chain stores are not interested in voter registration because for them it's seen as too political, even if you're nonpartisan.
Yeah.
So this is Laverne. I have a question. And it's back to what you were talking about, getting us the information. Would you also include the little cards? Like I have a little card, it's called myohiovote.com, and all they have to do is scan it, and it will give them like their polling location, or if they're registered to vote or not. You know, some people still may have questions about that. So do you have those? Also, do you have the little clipboards with or some signage that we could put on a clipboard maybe and use? I don't even know that we'll use those, but something else that we can identify ourselves as registering people to vote. Do you have any of those?
Right, we do have clipboards, and on the back, I forget exactly what it says, but it just says like something like voter registration, or it says like register to vote or check your registration on the back of the clipboard.
Right.
You know, we have some clipboards that we can, you know, definitely let you use. We do have like small little business card type things that on one side have the information on registering to vote online or checking voter status, and then on the other side it has information about our voter guide. So that's like the smallest piece of information that we have, that just has those two places where people can go quickly to look that up.
So if we're planning on 2 or 3 events maybe in August or September, how soon do we need to get well, we actually want to do some heart cards for our organization with some of the information so we can have our logo on it. How soon could we get that information from you? Can you mail it to me, or can I pick it up from someplace, or?
Yeah, you can pick it up from me. I usually don't need too much notice unless you want something special. I do need to generally, I need to get in touch with the person that's working on the swag to see if she's put the order in, when that additional information will be here. So I guess what I would need from you would just be a list of exactly what you're looking for and how many pieces.
Okay.
Then we can go from there.
Okay. So our committee is having a call, I think on Thursday night. So I'll contact you on Friday with some of the information, or someone from our committee will contact you.
Okay. Let's see. The rest of my slides are more just kind of small points. Some people are interested in political party enrollment. That's only done during the primary election. So they cannot change their political party status during the general election. And it's not even really enrolling in a political party. It's just their voter history. It shows that they either requested a Democratic ballot or a Republican ballot or a Green Party ballot or whatever. Okay. Some of these we've already gone through, but do I have to register for every election? No. Some people don't want to register to vote because they're afraid they'll be put on the jury list. And my response to that is that if you have a driver's license, you're already on the list to be on the jury. So if you don't have a driver's license, then maybe you shouldn't register to vote then if you're really concerned about it. But most people are already on the list for jury duty. Okay. We talked about the students registration. What do you do if a person's homeless or doesn't have a permanent address? So people can register to vote at a shelter or other location like a church or a food pantry, any place that they intend to return and can pick up their mail. And most organizations that serve the homeless, they already have that kind of set up. So if you're working near a church or a homeless shelter, you can talk to the people working there and they'll say, oh yes, we use this address for people that want to register to vote. Okay, so we move.
What about nursing homes? Nursing homes?
Yeah, if you're in a nursing home, you need to register at the nursing home. So you need to if you just moved into a nursing home, you need to re-register to change your address. And usually nursing homes have a pretty good system for that. They will have an administrator who helps people fill out their absentee ballot requests and make sure that people are getting their absentee ballots. Not always, but a lot of times that's been my experience. If voter registration application is incomplete, can we write in the missing information? The answer is no. If you're helping someone and they're not able to write the information in themselves, like for example, if they're elderly and their hands are shaking and they can't hold the pen, or if they're illiterate, you can write in the information for them, but you cannot sign the form. They have to sign the form themselves. So if someone is with you and you find a mistake on their form, then you can have them change it, but you can't change it after the fact. Another thing to take into consideration is that you can't offer anything of value for a voter, for someone to register to vote. So that includes things like donuts, coffee, that even includes a stamp. So technically, you are not allowed to provide a person with a stamp so that they can mail in their voter registration form or their absentee ballot request. This is something that we see as a major problem for people in underserved communities, because for them, going to a grocery store and buying a whole book of stamps, that's a significant amount of money, and the only place you can go to buy an individual stamp is the post office. So we're getting into like even more complications. We've tried before having individual stamps with us and just selling the stamp for 50 cents. Or, honestly, if it's your neighbor or just a friend you're trying to help out, then it's fine. But technically, you're not allowed to give someone a stamp after they register to vote. Okay.
Elizabeth, I have a question. So is that against the law to give them anything in the
It
ballot?
is against the law, yes.
All right, that's okay. Thank you.
Yeah. We requested, our state office requested some clarification from the Attorney General's office about that, and we were told that it is against the law. I don't think they've ever arrested or fined anyone for that, but technically it's in a statute that you can't do that. This is just an interesting piece of information I always think is that anyone can conduct a voter registration drive. You don't have to live in Ohio. You don't have to be a US citizen. There's really no restrictions except felons who have not yet completed their sentence cannot assist with voter registration. And then you can make photocopies of completed voter registration forms, and that would be for follow-up if you wanted to track the applications through the system, or if you wanted to follow up with like a text saying remember to vote on November 3rd, something like that.
Trump, who is described as furious at the underwhelming rally turnout, according to sources close to the White House.
The biggest mistake women can make when it comes to.
So that is about all I had for you. If you have, further questions, you can feel free to ask them now.
Can I ask a question about, you've mentioned felons and serving their time a couple of times. And then I saw probation on the last screen. So if a felon is out on probation, are they still serving their time and so they cannot vote? Or once they're released from jail, they are eligible to vote?
Once they are released from jail, they're eligible to vote. If they're on probation and they're out of jail, they can register to vote. They just need to re-register, even if they were living at the same address that they were living in before they served their time. The last slide, there's like a different statute that covers who can conduct voter registration drives. And so I think that that's like an extra thing that they threw in there, but it doesn't affect their ability to vote.
Okay. Thank you.
And I think a lot of people don't re-register.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's the big issue.
Yeah.
To get out.
That's a really
Elizabeth?
big area. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I'm just wondering about registration of college students on campus that are not from Ohio.
So they have the same choice. They can either register to vote in Ohio at their college, or they can register to vote at their permanent home, wherever that may be. But they can't register both places.
Right, one or the other, is that correct? So
Correct.
if they choose then to register under their campus address, that would then be their permanent address for voting purposes?
That would be their address for voting purposes, but for everything else, like financial aid, their car title, or their license plate,
Okay,
their permanent address would be
okay,
Pennsylvania or wherever.
okay, gotcha. Thank you.
Elizabeth, to follow up on that, how do they prove, or do they have to prove what their address is on campus or at a campus apartment? How do they prove that?
So most of the time, the voting location, the polling location, will be on the college campus. So for example, at Ohio State University, for most of the students, it's at the student union. And Ohio State has like a letter that they send to every student, and the student can then print that out or show it on their phone, and that's their like ID for voting that shows that this is their address.
Okay,
But I mean, that's again is something to bring up with the student, because if they're, maybe they didn't know that Ohio State did that, if, maybe they missed the letter, or, so just letting them know that they have to bring something that shows that they are actually going to school in Ohio.
Going to school in Ohio, because I know, for example, my daughter's roommates, two of them live in other states. One has a California driver's license, one has a New York driver's license. But you're saying that wouldn't matter if they chose to vote in Ohio because they're students at Ohio State.
That's correct.
Okay.
And if you can also use your driver's license with a previous address on it as your voter ID when you're going to vote. It doesn't have to have your current address on
I have one more question that doesn't have to do necessarily with registration. So when we vote absentee, the many of us who do so, you said the results are not published until the night of the election after the polls close. Do the parties get to see how the votes are trending ahead of time? Sometimes when we're watching, it appears that they know ahead of time, kind of, who's leading in the polls, so to speak. And how does that happen?
Right. So they do not see the absentee ballots beforehand. The results are kept strictly within the Board of Elections. I think they can make those projections based on, they can tell a lot of times who has requested absentee ballots, how many people from Franklin County requested absentee ballots versus maybe a more Republican-leaning county. So they can make a lot of guesstimates based on that information. And there is a lot of voting information that's public, so they can look at your history of what you voted before and just make assumptions based on that.
Good. I think that's it.
Okay. Well, thank you all for having me.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth, and we'll be in touch on Friday to talk about getting.
I'll try and send you something tomorrow with like the recording and just some general links, and then we can discuss our plans a little bit more in the future.
Okay, that sounds great. Does anybody else have any questions? Okay.
No, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Been very helpful.